The Gambia's democratic transition, initiated with the removal of dictator Yahya Jammeh in 2017, remains incomplete. And this is due to slow progress on key institutional reforms. Despite significant initial achievements in human rights and freedom, democratic consolidation is threatened by a stalled constitutional review process, persistent corruption, and concerns over executive power. Our focus today is on the most significant failure of the transition: constitutional reforms. A little background. There was a draft constitution in 2020, the result of nationwide consultation, and included a 2-term limit. This failed to pass Parliament. A revised 2024 draft, which removed the retroactive application of term limits that would have prevented President Adama Barrow from running in 2026, was also rejected on July 7, 2025. Now, analysts say the failure of the 2024 draft bill to pass second reading reflects a complex and polarized public discourse, even though the government championed it as essential for stability and a modern republic. As it stands right now, the 1997 Constitution, which was drafted under military control and lacks strong democratic safeguards, remains firmly in place. The implications are dire, as are the questions. Who benefits from the status quo? Will the Gambia be able to complete its democratic transition without a new constitutional order? Today's conversation is a review of the issues and possible ways to move the transition process forward. And for informed perspectives, we've invited Risa Raj Mohammed, a former lecturer of law, University of the Gambia. We also have Ma Young, founder and executive director, Gambia Participates. We're expecting one more guest. We will introduce him when he joins in. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us on today's program. I will start with you, Ma, and just ask, do Gambians still believe that constitutional reform will materially improve their lives, or has reform become an elite conversation with this second failure to pass the constitutional amendments?
Thank you, Felicity, and it's a pleasure to be on this program. I think our democratic transition and consolidation cannot be complete without constitutional reform. We tried it in 2020. It was rejected based on party lines. It's also important to give context. It is our National Assembly, in our case, Parliament, that has to pass that particular constitution before it goes for a referendum. And the threshold is a 2/3 majority. In 2020, they failed to pass the 2020 draft constitution. Another revised draft of 2024 was also tabled and was rejected in July 7, 2025. The 1997 Constitution is not fit for purpose. There are so much executive monopoly that have been powered by that particular Constitution. It's all not bad. It has laws, provisions that commensurate with the some of the universal human rights standards, but the lack of separation of powers, executive monopoly, and the executive actually having say in who becomes a parliament, especially if they can nominate a parliamentarian to be in office at the same time as well, having somewhat powers when it comes to the judiciary, because they still hire the judges, right? And they can also remove judges with the support, also like say, the advice of the Judicial Service Commission. And then also the electoral management body, the chairman, in order to call it the president, is also appointed by the president without any parliamentary scrutiny. So these are all checks and balances that are missing in the 1997 Constitution. However, what we believe as civil society, since we've tried it twice and it's not working, the alternative is to do piecemeal legislative reform. There are certain provisions of the Constitution, let's say, for example, the issue of term limit, which is not present in our current Constitution. We could advocate for that to be presented as a constitutional amendment bill in the National Assembly. The issue of nominating National Assembly members could also be tabled to repeal that in the Constitution. Some of these are not entrant clauses, meaning they are provisions that could be amended at Parliament level without referring it to a referendum. But there are obviously some entrant clauses that will need us to go for a referendum. That was the reason why we opted to go for an overhaul constitutional reform. That has proven difficult, and I think we will go with the 1997 Constitution in the 2026 election. And what that means is any president that is elected in office can serve an infinite term. That's not democracy. It also means that if you are to go for an election, if you win by one vote, you become the president. So let's say there are 15 voters and a candidate only gets to have 6 votes.
Amar, you've given us a lot to chew on. I'll bring Risa in to just do a quick comparison. Critics of the 2024 draft said, in addition to what Amar had said, that it diluted key democratic safeguards from the 2020 version. Do you agree? If yes, what critical democratic safeguards were lost in the version that is now been rejected compared to the ambitious 2020 version?
Thank you, Facility. Oh, Facility, that's your name. Apologies.
No,
thank you for that, and thank you for having me here today. Before I outline what you've raised, I think it's worth acknowledging and noting that Dr. Satang Nanebe has been following this for years and has written quite a lot of literature on the topic, as well as adjacent relevant topics, especially on foreign judges, which I'll mention come into play in regards to this draft constitution. So I'd encourage all interested viewers to take a look at some of the literature she has written on it. In regards to the draft 2024 constitution that has been rejected, there were some very concerning changes from the 2020 draft, which many, including myself at the time when I gave my feedback on that draft, were in favor of. Those have been removed. Specifically in relation to parliamentary oversight, the proposal is that all appointments, including ministers, the Independent Electoral Commission, and independent institutions, those would have complete oversight for all. Those would lose the complete oversight for all of these appointments. We're centralizing power in this regard. An additional change would be the unilateral power for the president to remove appointed National Assembly members. This is completely undemocratic, and even a comparative review report completed in October of last year suggested that it would be undemocratic, and this was a Gambian report. Other huge concerns that have come out of examining the 2024 draft constitution was the human rights abuses. There was, interestingly, an increase in police detention periods. They wanted to raise that period from 48 hours to 72 hours. They also wanted to change and make stipulations around media ownership and operations. I found this incredibly notable because they wanted to ensure that only Gambian citizens could own the media. And what's alarming about this is preventing individuals who are not citizens, who could perhaps be safe if there should be government retaliation against how the media portrays the government. They would no longer have that. You'd have to be a Gambian citizen to own the media that would be criticizing the government. So that raised a lot of questions. The accountability aspect of the Constitution was completely changing. Chapter 5 of the 2020 draft Constitution, it was titled Leadership and Integrity. That was completely removed. The intention of this chapter was to combat corruption directly, and that is completely absent. But of course, one of the greatest issues for contention, and what has been discussed quite a lot, is the term limits and the retroactive term limits that was removed from the 2020 draft constitution. That raises alarms as many feared and many scholars have feared, that President Barrow was using that, no longer having a retroactive application to reinforce his intention to run in the 2026 elections. So it does feel very politically motivated to intentionally withhold the retroactive application of the two-term limits to perhaps allow the current president to have another term. I could name more issues that arise from the 2024
I mean, there's
draft.
so many issues, like trying to wrap my head around it was quite a chore, and that's why I said I'm going to try and make the questions as concise as possible so we can get more from your contribution. Talking about that, Ma, I'm merging these two questions because I think they're related. You also talked about it, presidential term limits. Why have that core demand from Gambians become such a political red line in both failed drafts? And I also want you to explain this retroactive clause and why it was successfully removed.
Right. So there are so many factors. Since 1965, when we received our independence, we have only experienced three presidents. The first from 1965 to 1994, which was the Jawad administration, and you have Yahya Jammeh's administration that came through coup d'etat from 1994 to January 2017. And then you now also have Barrow, who wanted to serve more than 2 times. That is a red flag for Gambians because we wanted to taste different style of leadership. We wanted to taste the policies and manifestos and programs of different leaders. And I think we have all settled that never again should we see a self-perpetuating administration in our country after suffering in the hands of a dictator for more than 2 decades. That is a red flag, and I think there are some surveys that were put out there, and majority of Gambians believe that term limits should be in the constitution. The retroactive clause is not something that I support because I think that was also one of the reasons why the constitution was rejected in 2020. The most important thing is the constitution put some safeguards, and the safeguards here in the 2020 draft was there's going to be a term limit. Now, in the schedule of that particular constitution, it put a retrospective clause. Now, what is the reason why I do not support that retroactive clause? Because I think if that constitution was passed, it was going to be up to Gambians to decide whether they want to vote for President Barrow to run for 3rd term or not. We put out a survey on Thursday, and in our survey, 55% of Gambians said that President Barrow should not run for 3rd term, and 60% said if he is to run for 3rd term, they are not going to vote for him. So it was going to be up to Gambians to decide whether Barrow should run for 3rd term or not. And then if that safeguard is there in the constitution, then any president that comes into office will have made a constitution that already have term limit. So that was problematic, and I think that drafters really did not do a good job in that.
All right, Risa, do you believe President Barrow's administration genuinely intends to see constitutional reform passed, or has delay become a strategy to preserve political advantage? The 2024 version, I'm told that they championed it, yet it failed.
I would say both are true. I think the presidency, I think the government has very much wanted the Constitution to pass, but they wanted the Constitution to pass on their own terms. It's very clear that had this gone through, and but through a referendum, Gambians had been in favor, and this had become the new Constitution, I'm referring to the draft 2024 version, then President Adama Barrow could have run again and had a 3rd term. I think that was always the intention. And should that fail, and as it has failed, we fall back to the 1997 Constitution where there are no term limits. So it has worked out both ways in what I believe President Adama Barrow wanted, to be able to have a 3rd term. I think that's the crux of it, and I think that's the issue at hand. No matter what, should the new draft Constitution be accepted, or should it have failed, President Adama Barrow would have been able to run again. I think it serves the people, it serves his intentions and how it impacts the people by advocating for a new constitution, still trying to facilitate a new constitution and then by blaming the opposition as to why it hasn't changed. I think it's highly politically motivated. It's very easy to blame the opposition when they try to have a new draft go through. But when we really look at it and look more than the surface at it, it's quite clear that they wanted a new constitution on their own terms. And the only reason they wanted a constitution, I would argue, is to present the idea that they were fulfilling the promise that Adama Barrow made when he first became president, that there would be a new Gambia agenda, a new Gambia era, a new one of democracy. And we haven't seen that yet.
Okay. Do you see, this question is for you, Ma, do you see potential for incremental reform through constitutional amendments instead of an all or nothing rewrite, or would that entrench the status quo, seeing as they seem to be stalling at every point?
Now, that is the solution, and I think that is the pathway in, making the 1997 Constitution better than it is right now. How we are going to do that, there has to be political consensus. This whole stuff has been personal, and I wrote a piece about it. 2020 draft was perceived to be in favor of the opposition because it has neutralized power, and the ruling party was not in favor of it. And 2024 draft, the opposition believe it is increasing executive monopoly, and as a result, they also rejected it. And it's important to note that Parliament have to accept the Constitution, as in passing it to the committee stage, so they can do the necessary amendments. All of these were rejected in the two attempts that we have experienced. Now, what has to be done, right, is the piecemeal amendments that I said when I started giving my statement. We have to go back and look at the 1997 Constitution, which we've already done here at Gambia Participate, and we've identified some undemocratic clauses that should be amended. And these piecemeal legislation will have to start with the ones that will not require us to go to referendum. We can do the amendments through parliament processes, and then the ones that requires referendum, it will not be possible for us to do it now before the 2026 election. That could only be possible after the 2026 election.
Okay.
The issue of term limits and the likes can be achieved during that period.
Ma, I'm going to stay with you and multiple questions at the same time. You talked about political consensus. Is it possible, looking at what we have, we know that the issue of term limits was mostly from political consideration, and you're talking about them, agreeing to review the 1997, I believe, Constitution. But the concerns here is if the Gambia is supposed to turn a new leaf, amending a constitution that is already said to be flawed would not be in the best interest of that pursuit. Your response?
Well, that was the reason why we suggested for overall constitutional reform. It has failed, and the thresholds are very high for us to achieve that at National Assembly. And our country is so polarized that politics is about political parties and not the general interest of the people. And it will be difficult even if you have to bring in a better constitution. And let me tell you some of the hidden secrets about this whole issue. The 1997 Constitution is even perceived to be in favor of both the opposition and that of the ruling party, because we have what we call force past the post. It is not an absolute majority, right? And I was trying to explain that. If you have 15 voters and one candidate only gets 6 votes, others get 5, and the other one gets 4, then the one with 6 votes is actually going to win. Unlike your country where you have a threshold of about more than 50% of the votes casted will have to be received by a candidate. So the opposition also believe that they stand a better chance with the 1997 Constitution to form a government, and the same with that of the ruling government. So it's whole complex, although these are not the narrative that they put out there. So what has to be done when I talk about political consensus? It is already established based on our engagement with the ruling party and the opposition. They all agreed on the term limit. It was in the 2020 draft, although there was a retroactive clause attached to it, but it's also in the 2024 draft as well. So they all agree that term limit is something that must be addressed. Now you have to start with that. If any political party comes out and then rejected at parliament, then we will know their real position when it comes to term limit. Because President Barrow keeps saying that he's a big fan of term limit. His third term limit is contradicting that. And so many other complex issues are all bundled up on this constitutional building process. So I think as civil society, we are not going to just sit and then say we have attempted to watch, it's not going to work. We have already documented this and then put resources out there. We are going to start doing this piecemeal legislative reform. We've done it with getting up a new anti-corruption law, which was done. We did it with the public procurement law, that was also done. And we also increased the time frame for the budget period, that was also done. So all of these amendments could actually be done, although it's going to take a very long time. However, it's important to mention the 1997 constitution has been diluted, but it does not mean that it is bad in its entirety. Most of the constitutions, the UK constitution, which is obviously not consolidated in one document since the Magna Carta in 1259, I believe, they have been amending, right? Law is an evolving process. You need to evaluate and then make sure that the laws that you're making is consistent with the current affairs and the generation. The same thing with the US constitution and any other constitution that have been there for more than 200 years or so. We have to evolve, we have to keep amending, but the most important thing is the fundamental human rights are guaranteed. And those fundamental human rights are actually guaranteed in the 1997 constitution. The issue is the issue of separation of powers, right? And then also increasing executive monopoly. But the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are actually, they are in our 1997 constitution, although some of them are what we call qualified rights, right? And you find them in many countries. Just that, let's say, for example, the issue of protest, we must seek for a permit, right? Because it has been qualified in the 1997 constitution. In the 2020 draft constitution, it was an absolute right, right? In the 2024, they actually reverted back to the 1997 constitution position. So these are some of the complex issues that we have detected in this whole saga.
All right. Risa, I want to go back to, we are the media, so I want to go back to something you said earlier to expand on it, and that is the clause that said only Gambians can own media. Has that been expunged or is still there? And what were the conversation around that people need to be aware of?
This is what I saw in the 2024 draft agenda. So this is what was going to be proposed to happen now if it had been successful. And I think you raise a great point in ensuring people are aware of it, because it was a small stipulation that I believe could be very easily overlooked, especially as the consequences and the repercussions of that aren't fully taken into consideration when you see it written on the paper. Essentially, what would happen is that if you are a non-Gambian citizen, you would not be able to control media. And whilst that sounds potentially fair to ensure that Gambians have the opportunity to own a resource as powerful as the media, it also creates a very scary opportunity given the recent authoritarian rule not long ago, where you would be criticized, and I use criticize as a very soft term, for speaking out against Yahya Jammeh's regime. And so if you have safety as a non-citizen in the Gambia to highlight and own media that will showcase horrors that may be happening by the government. I'm not saying any are happening right now, but it opens up the door for in the future, should anything happen that is a violation of human rights, preventing honest coverage of that media due to the risk that could directly impact Gambian citizens should they be the ones owning that media and reporting on it. It will discourage Gambians from really allowing a proper and objective perspective because they are intrinsically tied as citizens.
All right. Ma, you've talked about referendum, but I want you to expand on that. How would a referendum look like? Can it bypass Parliament? And is there really a legal space for that?
Yes, there is a legal space for it. I believe it should be Section 226 of the 1997 Constitution when it comes to repealing the Constitution or an act that seeks to repeal certain parts of the Constitution, especially those that are entrenched. So there are thresholds. The threshold is if you are repealing an entrenched clause, right, or the constitution, there must be two-thirds majority of the National Assembly. So we have 58 parliamentarians, with 57 having voting rights. So about between 42 to 43 of the members must consent, must vote yes for that particular constitution to for that amendment to be referred to a committee state. Now, once it is gone to the committee state, the committee will look at it and then do their review. Once that is done, any amendment that should be done, they will do it at the consideration stage. Fast forward, you go for a third reading, and in that third reading, also the threshold is the same. Now, after referendum, after it has passed the committee stage, or the parliamentary procedures, it will be referred to the Independent Electoral Commission to commission a referendum within 6 months. And during this referendum, you need to have 50% of all registered voters participating in this referendum. And out of that 50% that are participating in this referendum, 75% must vote in support of that particular bill. So the threshold is very high. We only get to receive that high voter turnout in presidential election. Even parliamentary election, we have about 51 to 53% voter turnout. So it will also require a lot of work to do within a space of 6 months.
So this will be championed by civil societies, right?
The referendum or the civic education?
The referendum.
It will be the IEC, the Independent Electoral Commission, that will organize the referendum. They are the one mandated. Civil society can only do civic education to ensure that we meet the threshold, and then also, if the law is a good law, then we advocate that most of, at least all of those voting to vote in support of it.
All right, let me come back to Arisa. Do you think ECOWAS or perhaps the AU should take a more active role in monitoring democratic backsliding in the Gambia?
I think so. But before fully even addressing that, in regards to the Constitution, I don't think that we should abandon efforts to enact a new Constitution. I think there needs to be efforts, as we've discussed in all aspects, where we facilitate and ensure that Gambians can vote should the referendum come along. But even before then, that better and greater efforts are put into having a new constitution. I think just because it didn't work out twice doesn't mean we should abandon it altogether. In fact, I think what's happened with the 2024 draft constitution allows an opportunity to scrutinize how the process this time versus the process in 2020. One of the criticisms that has also come out from this 2024 draft was the failure in transparency and consultancy regarding the draft. The Bar Association, the Gambian Bar Association, published a warning that they found that it had been incredibly difficult to locate and identify what was happening in this draft constitution and the decisions and reasonings behind them. It was very opaque, and there was no transparency and involvement with the community and with Gambians. In 2020, as opposed to in 2020, I, at the University of the Gambia, was involved in submitting our suggestions for the draft constitution. Everyone seemingly was involved in providing and at least offered the opportunity to give feedback to the draft constitution. And there was, of course, the Constitutional Review Commission. There was no Constitutional Review Commission in this 2024 draft constitution. Instead, what happened was the government redefined and made some modifications to the 2020 constitution that had come out of the Constitutional Review Commission. I think it's important to note that we need to kind of start over and create another Constitutional Review Commission.
That's the whole point of conversations like this, to give our viewers informed perspectives so that they can decide where they lean towards more. You are leading towards a new constitution, more things. We can rescue what is currently available. Risa, let me stay with you and ask, what are the risks of going into the 2026 election under the same outdated constitution for both legitimacy and stability? In 40 seconds, if you can. Understand we need to go on a break.
I think what's one of the greatest risks, honestly, is not necessarily the following the 1970 Constitution, but more so the impact on society and culture and the voter. I think there are many individuals who feel incredibly let down and feel fatigued and almost have given up on the idea of the Gambia reaching a democratic state. And I think with that can come with then being fearful of voting against Adama Barrow due to the trauma of the previous regime and feeling that they must continue voting for Adama Barrow because he's the current president. And he didn't make the country more democratic as promised.
All right, that's a good place to leave it for now. We'll go. Thank you very much to you, Risa Raj Mohammed, former lecturer of law, University of the Gambia. At least I didn't muddle your name this time around. Ma Young, founder and executive director, Gambia Participates. Thank you very much for being here.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having us.